Florida, 2017. The courthouse in a small coastal town looked like any other on the outside, a dull brick building. Sun-faded flags swaying slowly in the muggy air, but inside, something extraordinary was unfolding. A woman stood at the entrance, clutching a bouquet of artificial white roses, dressed in a lace gown that shimmered in the fluorescent lights. To anyone watching, she appeared to be a bride without a groom, yet she carried herself with absolute certainty, smiling at the empty space beside her, nodding as though someone whispered in her ear. She told officials that she was here for her wedding, and when questioned about her fiancé, she calmly explained that he was right there with her. Invisible, yes, but real to her. A ghost. This was not a prank, not a publicity stunt, and not a nervous breakdown in progress. At least not in her mind. For Amanda Teague, this day was the happiest of her life, a day she believed would finally make her whole again. To understand Amanda's story, you must understand the emptiness she carried long before she ever walked into that courthouse. Amanda was a woman in her mid-40s, vibrant, eccentric, known to many in her community as a performer who once dressed as Jack Sparrow for children's parties and local events. She had flair, she had humor, and on the surface, she had joy. But underneath the costumes, behind the laughter, was a deep, gnawing loneliness that followed the loss of her husband years earlier. Grief is a weight that can twist reality, bending the line between what is imagined and what is felt. And for Amanda, that line would dissolve completely. Neighbors noticed subtle changes first. At night, when the streets were quiet and the ocean breeze whispered through cracked windows, Amanda's house pulsed with strange activity. Candlelight flickered at odd hours. Curtains shifted as though someone stood behind them. And most unnervingly, Amanda's voice carried through the thin walls, not the distracted mutterings of someone talking to themselves, but full conversations. She laughed, she argued, she whispered softly, and when asked who she was talking to, she answered without hesitation. Her partner, not a man of flesh and blood, but the spirit of a Haitian pirate who had died centuries ago. The claim shocked those who knew her, but Amanda did not waver. She described him in detail, his name, his past, even the way he made her feel. She swore that their connection was real, that he visited her at night, that she felt his presence beside her as clearly as she once felt her late husband's hand. Friends dismissed it as eccentric grief. Others wondered if she was slipping further into depression. Yet Amanda's conviction only deepened, and with each passing day, she spoke of her ghostly companion not as a fleeting presence, but as the love of her life. The more she shared, the more vivid her descriptions became. She claimed that this ghost was protective, tender, and attentive in ways the living rarely were. She gave him a name, spoke about their routines, and even suggested that he shared her bed. To Amanda, this was not fantasy, it was fulfillment. And once the idea of marriage arose in her mind, it seemed less like an absurd notion and more like the natural next step in a love story no one else could see. Imagine the reactions. Some laughed, some recoiled, others whispered about Amanda's sanity. But Amanda herself stood tall, insisting that this was her truth. She began the legal process, studying maritime law, which in certain interpretations allowed for unusual unions at sea. She made preparations the same way any bride would, choosing her dress, her flowers, the music that would play as she walked down the aisle. Only in this case, the aisle was the deck of a boat, drifting quietly on international waters where she believed her vows could be binding, and the groom was a spirit visible only to her. The day arrived, and Amanda gathered a small group of friends willing to witness what many considered impossible. The ceremony was simple, quiet, almost eerie in its intimacy. As the waves rocked the vessel gently, Amanda recited her vows, pausing as though listening to another voice respond. She reached out into the air, grasping at nothing, yet her eyes filled with tears as though she truly felt the squeeze of the hand. She kissed the empty air before her, and in that moment she became, in her words, a wife once again. To the world, it was bizarre, laughable even. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as another headline in the endless scroll of odd human behavior. A woman marries a ghost. But to Amanda, this was sacred, binding, and absolute. She returned home as a married woman, no longer alone, no longer consumed by grief, but tethered to something far stranger. At first, the arrangement seemed to bring her peace. She spoke of her husband with joy, explaining that she finally felt secure again. She claimed they shared conversations, shared intimacy, shared life in the only way possible for a woman and a spirit. For a time, her eyes sparkled with the same joy she had once carried in her youth. But as the weeks turned into months, that joy began to curdle. Small complaints surfaced. She mentioned feeling drained, her body weakening, her health faltering. She confessed that her husband, once so gentle, had become possessive, jealous, even manipulative. She said he whispered things she didn't want to hear, made demands she could not fulfill. The invisible groom who once brought comfort now brought fear. Amanda began to wonder she had made a terrible mistake, one she could not undo. But even as her fears grew, she remained loyal. She told friends she would not leave him, could not leave him, because their bond was deeper than life itself. Divorce was not an option, separation unthinkable. She had made her vows, and to her, they mattered, even if no court in the land recognized them. Still, the shadows in her home grew longer, and the lines under her eyes deepened. Neighbors who once laughed at her eccentricity now worried quietly. Something was wrong, something darker than grief, something she couldn't or wouldn't escape. And then came the claims that terrified even those who dismissed her story from the start. Amanda said that her ghost husband had turned violent, that he pushed, threatened, and haunted her in ways she could not bear, that her health was failing because of him, that he was draining her life force, binding her to him not with love but with chains she could not see. This was no longer a whimsical tale of love beyond death. It was a nightmare unfolding in plain sight. Amanda had invited something into her life, and now she swore she could not get rid of it. Her laughter was gone, replaced by fear. Her eyes, once sparkling with strange devotion, were now shadowed with exhaustion. She admitted to friends that she needed help. But even then, she would not let go of the man she claimed as her husband. The line between fantasy and reality had blurred beyond recognition, and as Amanda's health declined, her story took a darker turn, one that forced the world to reconsider whether this was merely grief and delusion or something far more sinister. Amanda Teague believed she had found love again, but the love she described began to take a darker shape. In the first months after her unusual wedding, she smiled when she spoke of her ghost husband. She told friends she felt complete for the first time in years, that her loneliness had finally lifted, that she was no longer haunted by grief but embraced by something extraordinary. But as weeks turned into months, the tone of her words shifted. She spoke less of joy and more of exhaustion. She said her husband had moods, that he could be demanding, that he would not let her rest. Her eyes, once bright, were ringed with shadows, and her voice carried a tremor she could not hide. She began to suffer unexplained illnesses. Her energy drained quickly, her body weakened, and doctors could find no clear cause. Amanda explained it in her own way. Her husband, the spirit she loved, was drawing strength from her, taking life to sustain himself. She whispered that he no longer seemed to be her partner, but her captor, that she felt him pressing on her chest at night, suffocating her, whispering cruel things in her ear that only she could hear. She admitted to friends that she sometimes wished she could take it back, undo the vows she had made, but in the same breath, she said she could never leave him. She had promised, and to Amanda, promises mattered more than her own safety. The story of Amanda's ghost marriage spread quickly beyond her neighborhood. At first, it appeared in tabloids, tucked between stories of UFO sightings and bizarre animal encounters. But soon mainstream media picked it up. Reporters contacted her, curious to hear her describe her life as a ghost wife. Some treated her with mockery, others with fascination. But Amanda welcomed the attention because she wanted the world to know that her love was real. Cameras captured her speaking earnestly about her husband, explaining that he was not a hallucination, not a fantasy, but a real presence who lived with her. She even explained that she had married him in international waters to avoid legal complications, treating the union as valid under maritime law. Audiences laughed, headlines mocked, but Amanda's eyes remained steady. She was not joking. She believed every word. But the more she spoke publicly, the more her private torment deepened. She confessed that the ghost had grown jealous, angry that she shared details of their life with strangers. She claimed he'd punish her for it. She felt ill again and again, bedridden for days at a time. She described him as controlling, saying he followed her everywhere, that she could not escape his presence. And yet, she refused to let go. She insisted that marriage meant forever, even if forever meant suffering. Psychologists weighed in, speculating from afar. Some said Amanda was experiencing complicated grief, her mind creating a figure to fill the absence left by her late husband. Others argued she was in the grip of a delusion so powerful that it shaped her reality. Paranormal enthusiasts, however, wondered if she had invited something darker into her life, a spirit that was not what it pretended to be, a presence that fed on her loneliness and clung to her once she opened the door. Amanda herself began to hint at this possibility. She said she felt trapped, drained, bound to a force that no longer seemed loving. By 2018, Amanda's marriage had transformed from a curiosity into a warning. She went on record saying that her ghost husband was not the man she thought he was. She described him as manipulative, even abusive. She told interviewers that she had made a mistake, that she had brought something into her life that nearly destroyed her. And then, most shockingly, she announced that she had undergone an exorcism, a ritual, she explained, to sever the bond between her and her ghostly spouse. She described it as the most painful but most necessary experience of her life, saying she felt as though a weight had been lifted from her chest, as though chains had fallen away. Still, questions lingered. Had Amanda truly freed herself? Or had she simply reframed her grief in yet another story the world could barely believe? Skeptics said she had spun an elaborate fantasy that crumbled under its own weight. Believers said she had been targeted by something far more sinister than a lonely imagination. Amanda herself seemed torn, relieved to be free yet still speaking of her ghost husband with a mixture of anger and longing. She admitted she had loved him, even if he hurt her, and she refused to deny that he had once made her feel alive again. Her story became a mirror for something much deeper than tabloid oddity. It revealed the terrifying power of loneliness, the way grief can carve holes so deep in the human heart that even a ghost feels like a welcome companion. It forced people to ask uncomfortable questions. What would you do to escape the emptiness of loss? How far would your mind go to make you feel loved again? And if love itself can turn toxic, what happens when the partner is someone you cannot see, cannot touch, cannot ever truly leave? Amanda Teague's tale captured the world because it blurred the line between the absurd and the tragic, the laughable and the chilling. To some, it was the story of a woman fooled by her own imagination. To others, it was proof that spirits, good or evil, can cross into our world if we let them. But to Amanda, it was real. Every vow, every fight, every terrifying night of suffocation and whispers, it was all real. And when she finally broke free, she was left not only with relief but with scars no one else could see.